the 60-day legislative session, which has today, tomorrow, and then time's up. Deadline is Saturday at noon in Santa Fe. It's also, at that moment, we have now found out that the current executive director for the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association will be stepping down from that position at the end of the legislative session coming up on Saturday. Ryan Flynn, who's been in this position since September of 2016, joins us now here on 96.3 News Radio, KKOB. Ryan, thanks for your time this morning. How are you doing today?
I'm doing terrific. Thanks, Bob.
You bet. Hey, before we get into why you decided now is a good time to step aside and allow new leadership to take over for the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, since we are down to the final 2.5 days or so of the legislative session up in Santa Fe in terms of the bills that have been debated this session up to this point that clearly will impact oil and gas. What are your thoughts here with just a few days to go?
Yeah, I think the state has become, as a result of this legislative session, the state will be much more dependent on the oil and gas industry than it already is. I mean, and obviously, as you're aware, over a third of the state's budget comes directly from the oil and gas industry. So our state already depends heavily on revenue generated from the oil and gas industry. And, certainly there's certain policy proposals that have been signed, that have already been passed and will be signed into law, such as increasing distributions from the permanent fund, that are going to increase the state's dependency on the oil and gas industry. At the same time, the state is becoming a much less attractive place for the oil and gas industry to do business. So you really have this unsustainable trajectory that we're on, where we're more dependent than ever at any time in history of our state on oil and gas revenue, and we're less hospitable than ever at any point in our history to the oil and gas industry. So it's a really interesting time, I think, for the industry.
Yeah. Bizarre might be a good word to describe it too. But Ryan, it's interesting the way you just laid it out. You're absolutely right, and there are so many progressive lawmakers in Santa Fe who really are on board with the idea of tapping into this permanent fund in one breath, but yet they would also support some of the bills up in Santa Fe that will do harm to the oil and gas industry, thus restricting the revenue going into that permanent fund.
You're spot on. I mean, that's exactly right. And, I'm not saying, I want to be clear, I'm not really commenting on the wisdom or lack thereof of increasing distributions from the land grant permanent fund.
Sure. Sure.
That's not my decision, and I don't really have a position on that issue one way or another. However, the point is, this is totally unsustainable. You can't in one breath say we need to be, increasing the distributions and our dependency on the land grant permanent fund, and then taking actions in the next breath that are totally contrary to the idea of a permanent fund. I mean, it's completely contradictory, and it's also easy because a lot of these decisions, they play out over the long-term consequences will be left to other people to deal with, and so you don't it's easier. You can make these decisions today, and you're not really going to see the problems. It's going to be in 10 years when production of the industry has dramatically declined and moved to other states or nations. And the revenue is really down to a trickle that others will be left trying to figure out how do we pick up the pieces and put in place policy that's less harmful.
And what makes it even more concerning is not only are you continuing to battle an increasing hostility at the state level, also now it's a double-barrel shotgun now coming from the federal side as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I don't think that. I think the conversation too often boils down into these political talking points, and people just totally cast. And I think there's fair debate about what's the appropriate amount of regulation, what's the most responsible way to generate this, energy. And all of those are fair policy discussions, but that's not what typically occurs, especially on the national level. It's really this nonsensical idea that we don't need oil and gas products in order to help power and create our society. And that is you're in la la land if you think that we can just stop producing oil and gas and it would be business as usual. If you looked around your room or your car or your clothes you're wearing, literally our products are interwoven into every element of society. And so this nonsensical conversation about let's get rid of the industry, it's a political talking point, but it bears no resemblance to reality. And so we've got to move past that kind of this should we or shouldn't we, and figure out how should we do it most responsibly. Those are where thoughtful policymakers should be really focused. And unfortunately, the conversations don't really focus on that.
Yeah. Ryan Flynn, the Executive Director of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, with us here on 96.3 News Radio KKOB. With that said, Ryan, as you've just articulated this growing hostility, as you've described it, is that playing a role in your decision to step aside now?
No, it really is just when I took this job, and at the time I had said I plan to stay for 4 to 5 years, and my board of directors has been amazing. A year ago, I still had 2 years left on my first contract, and they without even talking to me first, they were really generous and ripped up my contract and renewed it for another 5 years. And so I have, I've really enjoyed what we're doing, but, I have certainly had 4 years left on my current contract. I just felt like it was time. It's a demanding industry. I've enjoyed every minute of it. The team that we've built is remarkable, but it just felt like, I was sitting there in the fall and over the holidays and just really felt like this was time to try something different. And so, like I said, I've been here it's been almost 5 years. Yeah. And it just felt like, about the right time.
Now, you're going to sort of stay on in another capacity while the transition is made to find a new executive director?
I'll be available to advise the organization as they go through this transition, and I'll do everything to help make sure that we don't miss a beat. The organization and the industry in New Mexico is trending. We're bucking trends nationally and in every other state. The good thing is, while there's certainly a lot of hostility toward the industry from political perspectives, when you talk to New Mexicans, our industry, that we've increased our standing throughout the state in remarkable ways. The overwhelming majority of New Mexicans respect and appreciate and actually have favorable views and attitudes toward the oil and gas industry. People have a better understanding of exactly what this industry means to the state of New Mexico from an economic perspective. So, we've done a remarkable job as an organization. I will make sure that we don't miss a beat over the next couple of months. But I will be, I do plan to move on to a new opportunity in the private sector, and I'll certainly be throwing myself, once I've had a time to kind of catch my breath, I'll be throwing everything I've got into my, the new path I'll be taking.
Well, and Ryan, I was just going to follow up on that perspective of it, because you're so right. I think sometimes people have this idea that your main job is to fight for the oil and gas industry and the companies who are out there doing the drilling, and that's certainly a big part of it. But I think as you wrap up your tenure here, let's say 4.5 years overall, more members of the public, more regular citizens of New Mexico know a lot more about the oil and gas industry today than they did 5 years ago, and the impact that it has on everybody who lives in this state. And I think that obviously is a compliment to the strategy that you wanted to employ, and that is increased public awareness.
I really appreciate that, Bob, and that's exactly right. Really kind of all this like political posturing and that kind of that noise. Really want to break away from that and have real conversations with people, with New Mexicans in Albuquerque and Las Cruces. People in the oil patch, they know the industry. They work in it, or they know someone that works in it. They've been raised in it. But most of the state, where in terms of population, doesn't really have a lot of knowledge or background in the industry, and they're fed a lot of information from people with an agenda. But New Mexicans are we're a great state. We're very open-minded Westerners. Our state really loves people who work hard, who are honest, and the industry, I think, like, really resonates with people regardless of where you live. And when we talked to people in Albuquerque and started having this dialogue, at first I had kind of armor on because I was so used to having to engage in these conversations from a political perspective in Santa Fe, where you have people with a totally disconnected view of the world in here, where they think you can get rid of it and it has no impact on the state. But gosh, once you start talking to people in Albuquerque and Las Cruces, people really appreciate, they want you to respond to their concerns and questions. But once you start talking to them, there's not like a hostility toward the industry at all. There's just a desire to understand more. And basically they just want to know, are you guys poisoning our water?
Yeah.
That's big question, because that's what I'm hearing over and over and over again.
Sure.
I see Matt Damon turning a faucet on HBO and there's fire coming out of it. Can you tell me about that?
And that's the other part. And once you sit down and have a reasonable conversation with people, just regular people who aren't hearing it from the politicians, they obviously also start to understand that the oil and gas industry itself is striking a balance between the environment and oil and gas. And they're not opposed to solar and wind. It all just needs to be a part of the puzzle.
100%. I mean, the industry. Look, our industry is run by men and women with professional backgrounds who have experience in international business. It's a global industry. It's a very sophisticated, smart industry, but it's also very much a kind of blue collar industry as well. So it's a fun. That's one of the things I love about it, is because I'm from a very humble background where we have to scratch and claw and fight for everything I've got. And at the same time, I also have been fortunate to work my way and get a good education. And that story of people who are smart but don't take themselves too seriously and work really hard, I think most people identify with that, because most people share the same view. They want people who work hard. They want people who care about their community. And once you talk to people, they're willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. New Mexicans are incredibly open-minded in most parts of New Mexico. Santa Fe is the city different for a different reason. So,
all right. Hey, Ryan, look, I just want to thank you personally for all of the appearances you've made with us here over the years to talk about the very issues you've just discussed, and that is to raise public awareness. And we'll certainly miss you, but best of luck to you in the future.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's been an honor.